fear works. Fear gets our attention, right? But fear also freezes us. There's this framework that I like to use because it helps you evaluate two questions. One, am I at risk? And two, can I do anything about it? A lot of times campaigns go heavy on the fear because they want to amp up that notion of risk. But if I'm at risk and I don't feel empowered, then I might as well just put my head in the sand, right?
When I first started designing games, I thought motivation was mostly about wanting it more. If you gave players a clear goal and some rewards, they'd push themselves to get there. Over time, I learned that the best games just don't hope that you're motivated. They quietly guide you when your motivation dips. So think about it. Great games don't ask you to summon willpower. They make the next step obvious, they give fast feedback, and they keep the challenge just right so you don't stall. They're built to help you act even when your energy wavers. That idea turns out to matter well beyond games. Adults who already want to improve their health, say scheduling a cholesterol test, they don't really need more pep talks. What they need are fewer steps and less friction. But in other spaces, like a teenager sitting down to do math homework, motivation really does matter. So the first job is to understand where someone's motivation really is. But then almost always the bigger lever is making action easier once a spark of motivation exists. Our guest today really lives in that space, helping organizations design experiences that don't just engage, but actually move people to action. We'll talk about why engagement alone can be a trap, how to uncover the barriers that stop people from following through, and why small, well-designed next steps can be more powerful than just hoping someone feels inspired. Welcome to the Engagement Architect podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bennett, and I'm so excited to have you here today. We have somebody named Sparky Witte who is from Neuron Labs. He's a behavior designer, and Neuron Labs does behavior design for good. And they've worked with organizations like the American Heart Association and the American Medical Association, but also with corporations like Walmart and Amazon. And now let me welcome Sparky to the Engagement Architect podcast.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. So, what first got you interested in this field? What was your journey like?
I've always been interested in how people think and how they make decisions. But when I was coming up, my path to explore that stuff was actually advertising and marketing. And so I spent quite a long time in that field and I loved the creativity of it. And then I got really lucky, and my client from an advertising side was the American Heart Association. We were building a new brand for prevention health, and they paired me with a behavioral design team for the first time. And I was just blown away as a light bulb moment. I was like, oh, this is what I've actually been trying to do my whole career. And we got on so well that I did become a part of their team. I actually jumped ship and moved over there, and that was Live Neuron Labs, and that was about 8 years ago.
It's a great story. It's fun when you find your group of people and you just lock in on what it is that you should be doing. Now, I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while, and we actually got a chance to work together in the past as well. And
Yeah.
I love how you're a thought leader on behavior design on LinkedIn. And one of your posts that really resonated with me was when you said engagement is not enough. Because with whether they're talking ed tech or we're talking healthcare or training, everyone assumes that if we engage people, we won. Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, we're interested in what is the behavior? What is the goal behavior, right? Do we want someone to start a running habit? Do we want someone to learn French? Do we want someone to manage their finances? Johnson and Johnson had a great paper where they identified little e engagement and big e engagement. So little e engagement is the stickiness, right? Do I enjoy and persist in using the product or the app or the experience? But Big E is what we're ultimately shooting for. And so it's not enough just that people spent time on our app learning or engaging if we don't see the real world application that's making their life better.
Another part of that post that I really liked was talking about why organizations often stop at tracking engagement. It sounds like the little e. But what does it look like to move towards true empowerment? Not just doing what someone tells you is best for you, but something that feels empowering for you.
I think that there's two sides to that. One is what are we tracking? The easier things to track, the leading metrics like engagement, like time spent, conversions, things like that, because they're easier, they're kind of what we focus on. And the lagging metrics are much, much harder. And in the case of health, even more so, because you're not necessarily doing the behavior on the app or on the platform. The first question is, what are we measuring and how can we at least attempt to measure those lagging metrics or that big E engagement? And then the other is, even when we do measure it, scheduling a cancer screening or going to a doctor's appointment or getting a vaccine, we can check those off as a binary yes or no. But unless we've talked to the user to understand their story around it and why it's meaningful, we're limiting our true effectiveness. So you also need to get that qualitative understanding beyond just the metrics.
So this kind of brings up another question, actually, talking about directly with the person involved. You've said that uncovering hidden barriers is one of the keys to driving healthier actions. Can you maybe walk us through an example where mapping out target behaviors maybe revealed something surprising, like you weren't expecting to see?
Again, sort of the rigor of behavioral science or behavioral design is what is that behavior, but then what are the antecedent behaviors, right? So if I want someone on Medicare to schedule an annual wellness visit, from a marketing perspective, we can be tempted to think, well, I send them a postcard, they get it, they dial the number, they make the appointment. Right? But if we really rigorously map that out, we understand, well, if I send them that postcard, they're going to get it and put it in a pile. And so the person's got to get out of that pile. Then they have to read it. They're probably not going to immediately take action, but they're going to put it somewhere where they remember to take action. And then a couple days later, they might remember it. And then they pick up the phone and then they navigate the phone tree. And then they've got to tell someone what doctor and what they've got to look at their calendar and figure out what time. Now they've made an appointment. Well, they have to remember the appointment. And those are some of those barriers. And certainly when we talk about social determinants of health, we elevate those barriers. But there's the invisible barriers go beyond that. What is the emotional barrier? What is my association with going to the doctor or getting a vaccination? And that's can only be uncovered through conversations and qualitative work. Once we understand that, now we can reframe the message so that we're not queuing up some of those barriers or that we're addressing those barriers. So it can be addressed in both the messaging and how can we actually remove that barrier? How can we give them access to transportation? How can we make it one click instead of a onerous web form? Things like that.
Okay, so talking about barriers and talking about emotions, right, which are key to patient behavior, one thing I noticed is you always emphasize next best actions. So when we think about those, why is reducing overwhelm so critical to motivation? And the second part would be, how do you design those small steps effectively?
So next best action is actually a term that I picked up from clients at Priority Health and Select Health. And they've got a program where they algorithmically can identify, based on the data we have, this group of patients is in need of this next best action, this next best health step, whether it's a colon cancer screening, an annual wellness visit. And so then it's really like, how can we give them sort of the easy button version of it, right? We really intended to do it, but all of the other steps and just got in the way. All those things take a lot of effort, but if you could wave a magic wand and put a button in front of me and say, press this button to make your appointment, I'd be much more likely to do it. Not everybody would, but that subset of people that's already motivated and intent would do it. So, how can we bring people as close as possible to that ideal state of just press this button and do it?
That's interesting because it sounds like education, healthcare, compliance is we have this system that doesn't really work that great. So let's see if we can make it 1% better or 5% better. But it sounds like what you're saying is we have something that works and it can be better. Well, what would it be like if it was the Disneyland version? What would it be like if it was the Apple version? What's the perfect version of this? And walk backwards from there rather than kind of having to push our way forward from where we are. Does that make sense?
It does. In the world of healthcare, the Disney version, the Apple version is usually far out of reach because there's a lot of systems and legacy and regulation, but there's also a lot of unnecessary sludge. So, how can we trim back those things? Do we really need this phone tree? What's kind of the art of the possible? How do we take what is a given and then what are the things that we can edit in terms of language or digital experience, things like that, that can remove steps? Or how can we remove the psychological barriers where all of the mental things that a patient has in their head for why they're not doing it, we can address those so at least they click the link, at least they dial the phone number, and they've started that step. And if there's barriers after that, we'll try to point them out and maybe there's something we can do about it or not, but at least we generate that first step.
I come from a game design background, and so I love your framing that patients don't often know the rules of the healthcare game. I think anyone who's tried to navigate care, it feels like kind of a game, but like a pinball machine where you're just being pushed around. What are
Yeah.
some of the most powerful ways that you found to reduce friction, but also build confidence in people that are trying to navigate what's really a complex system?
That frame of sort of it being like the world's most confusing board game. And there's always that long stage where you're just like, how does anyone ever do this? Right? You're just kind of bewildered. And then you play it a couple times and you're like, oh, this is great. This is a lot of fun. Now we understand it. Looking at that gap between I played it a bunch of times and now I understand it and it's fun, that starting place of bewilderment. And a lot of times when we're in the healthcare space, we have that curse of knowledge and it seems fairly straightforward to us, but to the patients, it's completely confusing, right? There's no rule book. And sometimes I try doing this thing and my claim gets rejected, or sometimes I try doing this thing and I'm not allowed to. Having that empathy for them and how can we make things more straightforward and simple? How can we explain things as if you've never played the game before so that you can sort of understand the more clearly the decisions to be made? Or we give you a good default. You don't have to make a decision, or this is the best option. This is really a good idea for you. Will you consider it?
Kind of keeping on the topic of games, you co-designed a game to spark curiosity instead of fear around cholesterol testing. What do you think that teaches us about when play and curiosity can be more powerful motivators than fear?
We did that for the American Heart Association. And so, fear works. Fear gets our attention, right? But fear also freezes us. There's this really great framework that I like to use called it's EPPM. It's the extended parallel process model. And it's very useful for health appeals because it helps you evaluate two questions. One, am I at risk? And two, can I do anything about it? A lot of times campaigns go heavy on the fear because they want to amp up that notion of risk. But if I'm at risk and I don't feel empowered, then I might as well just put my head in the sand, right? And conversely, if there's no fear, that's also a problem, right? If I don't perceive that there's any risk to me, then I don't take action. But if you can find that sweet spot where there's some salience that I am at risk and high self-efficacy, I can actually do something about it. That's where action takes place. But with regard to that game, the campaign that was used in awareness was more sort of fear based, right? It was sort of the classic clutching at the chest kind of imagery. So we had to turn it around into something that was started from first getting your attention and delivering an enjoyable experience, and then turn it around to the education piece of it. The title was LDL on par. So it was a little mini golf game. And just like in golf, a lower score is better. And by playing along, you could get information, you could get a card and fill out to be able to play. That would give you the opportunity to get SMS messages to remind you of your intention to get a screening.
So let's get practical with a couple questions. With the American Heart Association's Habit Coach series, you busted myths about why habits don't stick. What's one misconception that you wish that more people just understood about habit change?
Yeah, motivation isn't everything. In behavior science, there's this idea of the intention action gap, right? That you can intend to go to the gym and not do it repeatedly because of all these barriers and challenges that get in the way. And increasing motivation is number one, very challenging. And number two, usually not the problem. People are very motivated. It's that ability in BJ Fogg's model, ability versus motivation. Ability is usually the thing that we struggle with. And as designers, it's the thing that we may be easier to control, right? If we can lower the bar on how hard it is to do the action, that's usually a surer way to success than trying to somehow turn up the dial on motivation.
So, for listeners who want to apply behavioral design to their own organizations, whether they're in health, education, beyond, what's one principle that they should start with tomorrow?
Well, I think the first principle, it's kind of an inversion principle, which is that when we're designing an experience or a message, we usually start with why should they do it, right? Like, what are all the,
Mhm.
if it was in advertising, what are the features and benefits of taking this next step? And we spend a lot of time coming up with all of these rationalizations for, well, you should do it because you're going to live longer. You should do it because of your children. And we never stop to flip it and say, why are they not doing it? Because in a lot of cases, the majority of people aren't doing it right now. And they probably have legitimate reasons for not doing so. So if you can better understand what's keeping them from doing it, then you can, through framing or messaging or through changing the experience, you can make it easier for them to say yes. You can make it easier for them to follow through once they say yes. And there's almost always some low hanging fruit I find there in terms of stumbling blocks or barriers that we can help them remove. I think just that one question of really understanding why aren't they doing it right now, I think can lead you to some useful insights.
This is the question that I ask all my guests. What do you think the future of engagement and motivation look like? Is there anything that excites you on the horizon?
I think there's a lot of promise with AI. People like to say that AI is going to bring the cost of computing down to zero, but it also brings the cost of cognition down to zero, help you translate your goals into action. Obviously, there's Black Mirror implications of this stuff as well, but I think there is a positive side. I think that's one of the things that is very promising to me, so we don't have to have one size fits all solutions, right? We can customize the message, the interface, the intervention depending on all sorts of different factors, including personality, motivational style. I think there's a lot of promise there as well to do good things in the world more effectively.
Sparky, thank you so much for your time today. I've obviously been following your work around behavior change and healthcare and learning a lot from it, but I learned so much more from this discussion.
Thanks, Chris. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Talking with Sparky reminded me why I keep coming back to my game design roots. Good games don't just capture attention, they quietly shape what players do next. They know the difference between a moment of interest and a moment of action. A lot of products stop at that first layer of engagement. They count clicks, time on tasks, logins. But as Sparky said, real impact happens when we move from little e engagement, which is stickiness, to big E engagement, where someone actually changes a habit, learns a skill, or takes a health step that matters in the real world. Games have taught us how to do that: lower the friction, surface the next best action, give clear feedback, and build confidence so people keep going. Those same tools can help in healthcare, learning, or really any place where motivation and follow through break down. That's what I want this podcast to explore: not just how to make things attention grabbing, but how to design experiences that truly help people act, learn, and grow. Thanks for joining us.